Hello hunters, welcome to Supernatural. Supernatural has a whole lot of monsters and creatures, which, makes sense, it's kinda what the show is about. These beasties range from pretty scary to kinda weird to just normal looking people who are supposed to be dragons. Even when they look kinda dumb, most monsters have at least a little bit of interesting lore to them that describes where they came from or why they do the things they do. However, sometimes lore can start out cool and interesting and end up weird and confusing after new information is introduced later in the season. And of all the monsters in the series, few suffer from this quite as bad as the Leviathans. They're first introduced at the beginning of Season 7, and they soon become the big bad of that season. It makes sense, they are pretty intimidating. They've got a lot of powers, including super strength and shapeshifting. They can kill angels with their bare hands. They're really, really smart, and most importantly, there's very few ways to actually permanently kill them. Even before we actually see them, they're built up to be this major threat. Death refers to them as the Old Ones and claims that they were the first beast created before humans and even angels. It gives them this primordial Lovecraftian feel. Then, after Season 7, we never see another one on Earth ever again. They sometimes appear in flashbacks and hallucinations, but we don't see another one in real time until Season 15. This is really weird since there's no indication that they were all wiped out or something. Their place in the timeline also becomes muddled after the introduction of the darkness, as it's pretty much confirmed that God created the 4 archangels before anything else, that currently exists at least, and that it wasn't until after the darkness was sealed away that he started creating other things. So, okay, I guess Death said that they came before the angels and didn't really specify about archangels, so whatever. Except then it becomes even more confusing after it's revealed that one of the ingredients for the spell that sealed the darkness was nectar from a Leviathan blossom, a weird plant that grows in purgatory when a Leviathan is killed there. So they did come first, along with purgatory? Except that can't be true, since both Death and Cass claim that Purgatory was created later, after the Leviathans became too dangerous for the rest of creation. Also, all of the dialogue we get from God and the Darkness and the Archangels really makes it seem like the Levi's weren't around until God was able to create the Earth. So, what's the story? What happened here and when? First, let's get a little bit more info about how these things operate. Like angels and demons, Leviathans don't really seem to have a solid physical form. Instead, they exist as this amorphous blob of black goo. In Purgatory, they can fly around like demons. However, unlike demons, they don't need to possess people and can just morph into a human form, complete with snazzy black outfits. On Earth, things are a little different. It seems like they aren't able to fly, but they can swim, and in order to have any solid form, they need to possess people, which they can do through physical contact. However, unlike other possessors, they don't just take over a person's mind and body, they completely mutate them to the point that they bleed black ooze and they can transform their face into this eyeless, sharp-toothed Pac-Man looking thing. If part of their body, including the head, is hacked off, they can pull themselves back together unless those parts are kept physically separated. Most impressively, they're able to shapeshift into anyone after touching just a tiny bit of their DNA. They don't even just transform the body, they can also change their entire outfit at will. They also gain a person's memories and skills after sampling their DNA, though there are things that they can't copy. Their leader Dick, stated that some people have a kind of spark to them that makes it impossible for a Leviathan to completely replicate them, with Charlie Bradbury being an example. They also don't seem capable of replicating a prophet's abilities, which makes sense. They can, however, mimic vampire fangs, which I find interesting. I mean, they also have sharp, fang-like teeth, and not just on Earth, as we see that Leviathans in Purgatory can also make this crazy monster face. We also see the skull of a dead Leviathan in Purgatory, and again, sharp teeth, which makes me think that this is a feature they got from their original form. This show never specifies whether they ever had a regular physical form, but we do get more insight in the official companion to Season 7. There it's revealed that the Leviathans were originally sea creatures that somehow learned how to possess land animals. This is important as it not only expands on their physical form, but also reveals that they did share the world with other creatures, which hadn't really been specified in the show. So they existed alongside other creatures, but when were they created? Before or after the whole darkness thing? A lot of fans believe that God didn't need to create the individual physical components of the spell, he just created the spell itself, and the various components are needed to mimic the metaphysical power of it. And I agree. However, I don't think it's random that certain things can be combined to recreate the spell. After all, Michael knew exactly what was needed to do it. No, I think that as God created the world, he broke the spell down into various pieces of magical energy, and he then incorporated those into the creation process in order to see what would happen. After all, we know from the multiverse that God likes to reuse and recycle his previous ideas. So he does this and gets Cassia, Rock Rose, Myrrh, and finally a weird goo. Remember, the spell doesn't call for a Leviathan or even the blossom itself, just the nectar from a Leviathan blossom. This goo, this nectar, it had unique properties. Michael says that it's used to bind the spell together, and I believe that this binding quality extends beyond the spell. I think the nectar can bind physical and magical elements together, and with the right combination, you can get not only life, but complex sentient life. And this is where I believe the Leviathans came from. Keep in mind, Death doesn't refer to them as the first creations, or even the first physical life forms. He calls them the first beasts, the first animals. God had previously created sentient beings in the form of the archangels, but this was a little different. The arcs were made with a specific purpose, and while they did have free will, they weren't really meant to act on it, and were instead meant to follow God's orders and basically be extensions of him. By contrast, the Leviathans had no predetermined purpose, no destiny. They could think and act of their own accord. Also, unlike the archangels, they were a natural part of the created world. Well, mostly. I don't think they started out super powerful and smart. I believe that after God saw their potential, he gave them a little extra something, a little extra divine spark that boosted their abilities. Think of it like the prototype to a soul. It was a kind of spiritual component that made them more than just complicated physical matter. He did this because, at least in my opinion, God's ultimate goal was to create creations that could create. He wanted to populate the world with beings that could admire what he made and then expand upon it, beings that could surprise him. And it seemed like the Leviathans could do that. However, since this was God's first draft in a few departments, there were a few issues. I'm going to make a whole video about souls, but in short, I believe that souls, as well as the weird proto-souls of the Leviathans, are meant to be little batteries of divine power and inspiration that fuel creation. One of the byproducts of a soul is physical and spiritual hunger, which, in small amounts, isn't necessarily a bad thing, as it can drive innovation. However, the Leviathans got a little too much hunger, to the point that they were completely consumed by the desire to consume. They were a little too good at it too, as they were able to escape their natural niche in order to prey on land animals. And we don't really know how they did this, but my idea is that they learned how to contain their consciousness within their individual cells, or whatever building blocks they were made of. They could then shred their bodies down into particulate matter, which, when even partially consumed by another creature, allowed a Leviathan to completely upload the entirety of their soul into that creature, allowing them to control and alter their body. They essentially became a sentient infection that threatened to consume the entire planet, and I do mean that literally. We see what their ultimate goal of the Leviathans is. It's basically to turn the world into a giant feeding ground. This, I believe, was the biggest flaw in God's eyes, as despite all of their wit and power, all it really amounted to was a global restaurant. No real art, beauty, innovation, drama, or intrigue, just eating. So they had to go. But at this point, God really wasn't into destroying his creations. So he decided to lock them away in their own little world, safely away from the rest of his creation. Thus, Purgatory, which, yes, acted like a giant cage, but I don't think that's what it was really meant to be. If it was, it probably would have looked more like what Lucifer was locked in, but instead it's full of trees and rivers and rocks. Why? I think that when it was created, God filled Purgatory with animals and creatures and prey that the Levi's could hunt and eat to their heart's content. He took away their ability to possess others, but let them change their form at will. They could still die, but for some reason, God made it so that if that happened, it would produce a Leviathan blossom, which in turn would produce the nectar that produced the Leviathans. We can only guess as to why he included this feature, especially since Michael states that this only happens in Purgatory. Maybe it was meant to ensure that the Leviathans could never completely wipe themselves out, or maybe it was a kind of advanced feature meant to be discovered and allow the Leviathans to experiment with creation. I have some other ideas, but that's a whole other video. Whatever the case, I do believe that the Levi's were too hungry and powerful, and they eventually ate most, if not all, of the prey that God had provided. I also think that at a certain point, they became reliant on Eve to provide them with new, better prey, but again, that's a whole separate video. Alright, so the last thing we really need to discuss is their weaknesses, because they're kinda weird. Like, yeah, they're vulnerable to magic because most things are, but their main weakness is borax, the household cleaning product. And not like holy borax or anything, just normal sodium borate that you can buy at the store. Why? It seems so random. And, well, I don't think it necessarily has a deeper reason, nor do I think it needs one. Certain creatures are vulnerable to certain materials, simple as that. Personally, I find it kind of fun that such powerful creatures are badly hurt by something so common and innocuous. If you desperately need a deeper meaning, the Leviathans are sometimes associated with corruption and dirtiness. Death refers to them as poisonous, and their black goo is striking and unnatural looking. This association is most visible in the only thing that can permanently kill a Leviathan on Earth, that being a bone of a righteous mortal bathed in the 3 bloods of the fallen. Basically, you need to take a bone of a really nice, uncorruptible person and drizzle it with blood from 3 different forms of corrupted beings, a fallen angel, the ruler of hell, and an alpha, which is the first monster that created a line of the rest, like the first vampire. That last one is interesting for a few reasons. Firstly, it implies that God didn't make this spell or whatever until after Eve started making monsters, but more importantly, the other fallen came to be by some kind of choice that corrupted them. An angel has to choose to rebel, and humans go to hell based on their decisions in life, but alphas are a little bit different, as they were either birthed or turned by Eve. It is possible that they were all originally humans who volunteered to be turned, but if not, it kind of implies that their involuntary existence is a corruption, which, yeah, but you don't have to be a dick about it. Also, monsters in general get a really raw deal in Supernatural, and you can learn more about it in this video, which I will link below. You can also argue that what separates an alpha from just a unique monster is that they made others like them, so maybe it's meant to represent an act of passing on corruption. And yeah, that's really all you need to make a little bit more sense of the Leviathans and their story. What did you think? Easy to digest, or did I bite off more than I could chew? Let me know, and while you're at it, do the other stuff. Check out my other channel, Look What You Learned, for videos about topics like history and real-world mythology, and really just anything that I find interesting. There'll be more videos to come, but for now, carry on.